Good evening. Welcome to the Fairfield Board of Education meeting for November 21st, 2024. Mrs. Lee, will you call us to order?
Mr.
Call the roll,
Begley.
please. Yes.
Mrs. Bernie Miller.
Yes.
Mr.
Present.
Clark.
Present.
Mrs. Gundrum.
Here.
Mr. Napier.
Here. Thank you. Mr. Clark, will you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Absolutely. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Presentations and resolutions. Mr. Smith.
Yes, Mr. Begley, members of the board, we do have one presentation scheduled this evening, and that is in regard to our transportation department. If you remember, probably back in July, the board discussed potential presentations for the school year, and the board landed on two separate presentations. The first one we've already had, which was a general overview, and the second was specific to declaring the declaration of impracticality of bus routes and transportation. So that is what we are talking about tonight. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Mr. Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Smith, Mr. Begley, members of the board. This evening, Jeanette Flick and I are here to present in reference to declaring the impracticality of transportation. So as we go through the slides, there's a lot of information. I will try to highlight where we pulled that information from, but I will not be reading the data word for word, so please read as we go if you don't mind. First of all, I'd like to go over very quickly the Ohio Revised Code, which helps us with this subject. 332701 is the transportation of pupils. So that is the reference, the guidelines that we use for how and when we transport, including distances. And what I wanted to highlight with that, when we get into private parochial schools, we must provide the same level of transportation to them as we do our current students. So the example would be, as we discussed last year, if we did move to a 2-mile walk zone, that would also apply to the private parochial schools in addition. Then there's 3327.02. That is the ORC in regards to declaring the impracticality of transportation. In your board packets previously in the week that was emailed, also emailed you the handbook, which they tried and condensed that down, and also a flow chart to help simplify that information. I'd like to start off with talking about the ridership average for Fairfield City School District. We have 47 daily routes. I wanted to highlight that each of those daily routes are made up of 6 to 10 trips, which there are about 380 daily trips. So a trip would be, we are a 4-tier district. So the example that I will give you is that if we have a bus that has 4 pickups for the first 4 tiers in the morning, but also has 4 drop-offs, that would be 8 trips. So how do we get to 10 would be your question. We do have midday trips, which do add up. So this is kind of an overview of that definition. We have about 7,799 eligible riders that are students, and we have about a ridership of 72%. Now, I will say we use the term 72% as an average. Our high school is a little bit below that, and our younger students, our elementary students, are a little bit higher than that. So we thought it'd just be easier just to use the 72% as the average for the numbers as you see below there to help make it easier to digest.
Mr. Perry, real quick, the 10 trip, and you said midday, that's the kindergarten, I presume?
Yes, kindergarten. Also shuttles.
Okay.
And we'll get into shuttles later as well because that does become a topic.
Okay, thank you.
Our average ride time. When we put ride time, the way this is calculated, we wanted to use a number that is actually the student experience. So obviously, if a student is picked up at the school and they're the first drop, they're not going to be 18 minutes. But again, it's averages. But again, this is the the experience for the pupil. So this does not count the ride time for the bus driving from the bus depot to the building, et cetera. We tried to put the number of what the experience is for the student. Now we're getting into the ridership averages for our private and parochial schools. So I'm going to have to go over some details here to help understand what we're trying to communicate here. If we look at the first line on Sacred Heart, when in the AM we say 65% of 277. 277 pupils are the number that requested transportation. So they must request transportation, so that's where that number comes from. Of that 65% of that 277 is what we averaged out when we counted 3 times on 3 separate occasions on different days of the week to give us that number. Previously, when I talked about our Fairfield City School District numbers, there is a week in October that is required by the state to count, and that goes on our T2 report, which is required annually to report to the state, and that's where those numbers come from. These numbers, we try to pick different days, so we did not want to pick like Monday, Friday, which has a tendency to fluctuate a little more, but we did try to choose 3 random days. Then also you will notice that in the PM, the numbers can change, as in to say the number of people that have requested transportation, and also then the percentages also can fluctuate from there as well. So again, as you look through these examples, at the bottom I tried to show that Sacred Heart, the 67% of the 277 is 180 riders, and then in the PM it's 190. Okay. There are 8 schools that we have highlighted in this, or is it 9? Oh, I'm sorry, it's 9. 9 private schools, private parochial schools that we do transport to, so we've highlighted all of those. Again, as you look at these numbers, at the bottom again, I used the top example to show the example of how 80% of 5, we have 4 riders, and then 15. Cincinnati Christian High School, as you notice in the PM, we have 100%, so all 15 people that have requested transportation actually do ride. Another reason why we like to highlight this is that previously in our communication, we highlighted how we calculate ridership in the district with routing, and we calculate, what was it, 75% ridership? What, 50? 50 students?
I think I went 75.
Went 75?
It was
So when we calculate riderships, like the number of seats that we have available, we use a lower number with Fairfield City School District because we know we're not at 100%. The opposite is true when we calculate our private parochial schools, because if they request transportation, we are assuming they are going to ride. So when we set up our calculations to start the year for our routing, that's set for the year. We can't make changes mid-year on that. So just wanted to highlight that because that is a little bit different of a process for us when we are calculating the Fairfield City versus our private parochials. Now we get into average ride time. As you notice here, some increased times. In addition to that, you will also notice an asterisk. The schools that have an asterisk after them require shuttles. What does that mean? That can mean that a student may ride in on a Creekside Middle School bus, then have to get on another bus before going to their end destination. So when we look at their times up there, that includes all of their wait time as well. And I'd also like to highlight, like with the St. Gabriel, where we have the student with the 205 minutes, we do have one student that is at the actual time. And even though that's not normal, obviously, we still wanted to highlight that does exist. That time does exist for a student that we do transport. In addition to that, any one of the ones with a range, as in to say Bethany and Cincinnati Christian Elementary, again, that is not normal, but there is a student or two that does have that experience.
And I'm sorry, can you go over that again on the, what's the 205 minutes? So we pick them up with our bus,
Correct,
they then come to the school,
correct,
and then they wait for an additional shuttle, and that's part of that time.
correct.
And that shuttle is it still our transportation department that then shuttles them to St. Gabriel?
Yes, when I say shuttle, we're still using the Fairfield City School District bus. They're just being brought to a destination to get on a different bus. So there is a scenario that exists where a student may ride in on a Crossroads Middle School bus, get on a second bus to come to Creekside, to then get on a third bus to go to their destination.
Gotcha, thank you.
Yeah, it's very complicated. Again, here on the second slide, as you notice, all of these schools do require shuttles. This is something that all of these schools, we communicate that ahead of time, that does exist. You will notice on the previous slide that sometimes the AM has a lower percentage of ridership or lower pupil ridership, but the PM is higher. Some of that is because parents understand that their student may ride in on a middle school bus in the morning, but not in the afternoon, and they're more comfortable with the afternoon, and then they make that designation, that choice. Okay, process for declaring impracticality. There are 6 factors to determine impracticality, which are listed there. We use a workbook to help us work through all 6 of these factors. 5 of the factors are pretty consistent anytime we deal with any student. The one factor that does change is the third one, which is the cost. And again, we have in our workbook, we plug in a few factors, them being how many tiers does it take the bus out? And what's another factor?
Number of students, how many tiers it is out of, and then you plug in like your cost per bus from your T2 report, and it breaks it down to the cost per pupil.
So again, we reference the T2 report, which is required annually by the state. This is since that is the factor that does move the most, it can be anywhere, the average cost for a Fairfield City School District student is $840 per the T2. So therefore, that's kind of the baseline. When we look at the cost, that's our baseline. We do have, as an example, we do have one student that was declared impractical, and the cost of the student was the entire cost of the route, which was $32,000 because it took them out of every single tier. So that's an extreme example, but that's an example of how we can have anything down from $1,500 all the way up to that 32. But again, that was a pretty extreme case, but just saying that's where that workbook comes in, that it helps us, that we can plug it in and then it spits out a number in the spreadsheet, and that helps us as a base for our guideline. So notification and appeal process. So once we utilize the workbook and we determine that a student should be declared impractical, that's when it becomes an item for board approval. Once that's approved, or if it's approved, the parent is notified via letter or email the payment in lieu of transportation contract. This past year, which the state determines, or this current year, that payment is $583.86. Once the parent receives that communication, they can accept. And then once they do accept, we just confirm at the end of the year that they transported their student, and then payment is issued, and the Treasurer's Department creates a PO for that parent beforehand and all of that. And that process is pretty fluid. If the parent does reject the offer, now we get into the flow chart of what it looks like, a whole nother process. There's mediation with the school district. Sit down with the parent or the group of parents and then talk about, are there any alternative ways, et cetera, explore all options. We also have to use our area coordinator from the state in that process, and we work together. If that breaks down and fails, then the parent can request a hearing at the state level. A hearing at the state level would be sitting in with the state would issue legal counsel that would oversee the hearing. Then the district would then present all of the reasons why, going back to the 6 factors that we, from the workbook that we previously discussed, would be the primary of the reasons why. And then the state then would take those facts and then rule and let us know yes or no. If they rule in favor of the parent, then we must provide transportation and we move forward. If not, the parent must take the payment in lieu of. This entire process can take about 3 months. So timing on this is important, not only for the parent, but for us to be quick in our response, number one, and also making sure that we're communicating clearly. I say that to lead us into this next slide, which is important dates. This is a change for us in our process. We've had a lot of discussion over the past 12 months of about this topic and how we can become better. So this is the ideas that we have moving forward. Meeting with our private and parochial school leadership ahead of time. Mid-February, we'd like to schedule a meeting with those leaders. We want to talk about what the process is from our perspective, but also what are the requirements and the information needed from them per the Ohio Revised Code. What we hear quite a bit is that this topic is so confusing. It's not only confusing for us, it's also confusing for them. So we want to do a better job of being a conduit, being able to explain what the process is and how we can work together. By mid-April, early May, we want to meet with them again and then communicate what the intent of the school district is. So we have some information throughout this school year. Do we intend to move into impracticality with these certain students moving forward to, and what does that look like for each of these private parochial schools so they can begin their communication to their parents? By mid-June, July, or I'm sorry, by mid-May, we would like to publish a process for parents to be able to request transportation. In the past, what has happened, it's been unstructured, so therefore it could be a phone call, could be an email, any number of platforms. What we would like to do moving forward is create an online platform for them to utilize. The initial discussion is just using a Google form for the parent. So then that would help us as a portal not only to collect the information needed in a timestamp, but also it allows us to provide an opportunity for the parents to be able to update their contact information, which is important to us. So when I highlighted earlier about the notifying the parent of the in lieu of transportation contract, the letter, we would like to move to email. There's no reason why we need to do snail mail for that. But again, it makes it easier to increase our communication with these parents to have their active email address, which also leads to our TransFinder, our app and our way to communicate with our parents, that this could be another layer to that if we have that information. If we have the parents that have requested their transportation in a timeline that I would say by early June, we would like to give them a 2 to 3 week window there to get the information in, make sure we communicate that. Then we would like to come back to the board between mid-June and mid-July to determine impracticality at that moment in time. The reason why is we need to do it 30 days in advance, number one. Number two, we want to give parents an opportunity to make adjustments if needed. So this outline of dates to me gives a lot more structure to us being able to hit timelines of not only communicating out, but also receiving communication in a timeline that we can make proper decisions. So hopefully those changes, as we work through that, we're trying to be good partners with our community members. And before we go to questions.
Yes, if that's okay with the board, I'd like to just make a few comments. First of all, I want to thank Mr. Perry and Mrs. Flick. This is a very complex topic, and that was one of the topics last summer when this became a topic of conversation as we were looking at transportation. We thought it would be valuable to come back to the board to discuss this topic. Again, I want to thank Lance and Jeanette for putting so much time into this presentation, but also even that last slide, those dates, those are some of the things that came out of those discussions just on our end to over-communicate with the schools that we serve. So that, again, we often talk about transparency and the importance of that. And so I really appreciate all of those dates and the things that we are putting in place to make sure that we are communicating with those other schools. A few other things I just want to share with the board before you engage in discussion and ask questions. One of the things that I want to point out is that when you see a list of student names when there's a declaration for transportation to be declared impractical, you may see 20 names. But if you go back to the slides earlier in this presentation, I just want to be clear, that doesn't necessarily mean that those 20 names are receiving, they have been using those transportation services. So, for example, one high school has 45 students requested transportation prior to the start of the year. But on 3 separate dates, the data that we have, there are only 9 out of those 45 using that service on a regular basis. But if that is declared impractical, you will see 45 names on the board agenda, even though 9 students are only using the service. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah, so I think that's really important as these names come before the Board of Education throughout the course of a school year, to know that just because you see a long list of names, that's not really an accurate representation of the number of students taking advantage of those services. Also, I think it's important to consider that, and I'm hopeful that this communication process will help. The importance of them giving, other schools giving us accurate numbers. Because we use those numbers to plan our routing, the timing, the stops, and all of those things. There's a lot of planning that goes into transporting this large number of students, not just those listed here, but our 8,000 that are eligible as well. So just a few things I wanted to point out that we've discussed over the last couple of weeks as they've been preparing their presentation. So, and this time I'll turn it over to the board so that you have an opportunity to ask Lance and Jeanette any questions that you may have.
So just one quick question, kind of building on what you were saying. So even on tonight's agenda, there is a number of names for declaring transportation impractical. And mid-year, they would appear because?
They just have requested
Okay.
transportation.
The original sign-up, if you will.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
And the schools that those students attend, transportation has already been declared impractical for those schools. Is that correct?
Well, we have to declare impracticality by student,
Correct.
but yes. So right now, we do not have an active bus going to those schools.
Right.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I got a couple of questions. Do we get any kind of reimbursement from these schools
From the schools directly?
or from anywhere?
Well, we do get reimbursement from the state.
From the
Now
state.
that's rolled up into, of course, a very simple equation. But yes, we do get some reimbursement from the state for transportation.
Okay, any idea what the total cost of the district is for these students compared to what the state gives us?
That would take some time, but we can
Okay.
get that put together for you.
Also, is it possible, like Bethany, you have 5 and 6 students, is it possible to use a van for that to save money?
I would say yes, but that means I'd have to have a van driver just for that role who's not a CDL. It's kind of complicated. I mean, is it possible? Yes, it's possible.
But any bus driver could drive the van, right?
That's correct. but then I don't know where they're going after that. So they might be dropping at Bethany and then picking up north for.
After they drop them.
Exactly. That's, again, comes into the wonderful world of routing.
Okay.
Without being in it, Jeanette's probably the best person to answer that question, but that's my guess, is that you've got a bus driver there's no lapse.
It's just not their run. They're just.
Right,
just not
they're
there
going
and back.
straight, they're dropping, and then they're going to a next destination on that bus, and they don't have time to go swap out a van for a bus.
Okay.
That's my guess.
I appreciate the guidelines for communication. I think that's important, right?
thank you.
If we have to make those tough decisions, then giving families as much advance notice as possible is, I think, appropriate.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, my questions actually have already been answered. I had about 4 of them, but thank you for that, and great presentation. Thanks for the time putting this together from both of you. The number of the $500 and $583.86,
Yes, sir.
is that a mandated number? Is that a average number? Is that the max dollar amount for each student?
That is the amount dictated by the state of Ohio.
So it doesn't matter the route time or anything like that? That's the number, right? Okay.
That's correct. They notify us in July. We get a letter sometime in
Okay.
In the
July,
summer.
Okay.
and then they tell you what, down to the penny, and like, this is the amount.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's good, that's good. And then I may have been thinking of a question when you was talking about this, so I apologize if you have to reiterate it. But you mentioned something about $32,000 or $34,000. Can you touch on that just at high level, where that number comes in and what that's, is that a real, is that a real number that comes to us, away from us? I kind of missed some of that, and I apologize.
Based on the T2 report.
Okay,
The T2 report breaks out the total number, the total dollar amount for the total buses. And then divided by the number of buses running, came out to, on this last report, 32,000 per
Okay.
bus.
Okay.
So if there's only one student requesting to a school and it takes a whole bus,
okay.
it's 32,000.
That's what I thought I heard. I wasn't sure it was that large of a number for that one student. That's, okay. Thank you for that clarity. And I think I had one more, but somebody else has one. Go ahead.
I just want to thank both of you for coming in and giving us this information. I'm very happy to see that we are always working on improving and making our communications better. I personally love Google Forms, and so I think that's a really great, easy, accessible thing for most people. My question lies is, do we know if we have any EL families that use these services that we would need to provide the form in other languages?
That's a good question. I mean, that's an easy, again, using Google, that would be an easy transition for us. But at this point in time, I couldn't tell you exactly yes or no or the number.
I don't believe so, because right now, our form is only in English, and we've not encountered anyone that we've had to, like in the school, sometimes I have to pull in an interpreter, and that has not happened, so I kind of think, for the most part, that's not an issue.
Thank you.
I didn't remember my question. A statement to that 6 factors, or I'm sorry, the important dates, again, like Mr. Vega said, it sounds like efficiency will be huge with that piece. So I think that's great implementation. And then going back to the students getting off at one school, going to another, let's say someone goes to Baden, they're going to St. Peter's. Is it one bus per that school? Or will a bus pick up from Creekside, say, and then go to Baden and St. Peter and Chains, or?
This year, it's one bus per school for every school in the morning except Bethany and Gabe
Okay,
go together on one bus.
okay, all right, thank you.
Out of the middle school.
All right, thank you. I know that's a very tedious structure that you put together, so thank you for that, Ms. Flick. Great job.
I feel like I had a lot of questions when we talked about this last summer, and I've forgotten some of them, and you've answered some of them. And I really appreciate all this information, and especially about the notification and appeal process and date changes and whatnot. I do sort of have like a logistics question. Like, so for the kids that we are transporting to other schools, like, say Bethany or St. Gabriel or whatever, if we take that on, if we don't deem it impractical, are we responsible for transporting from their home to that school? Or could we just say, hey, folks, if you want us to take your kid to school, we need you to bring your kid to Creekside by such and such time?
That's a good question. You are able to communicate to the parent that you must bring your student to their school of attendance for pickup.
Well, I don't know 100%, but I would say that it goes back to offering the same service that we offer to our students. So I would say if we're picking up K through 10 for our students, probably require to pick up K through 10 for their students.
She brings up a
I
great
do
point.
believe, if we're talking about high school, I didn't hear that part of the question, so, but I do believe from all the conversations we've had over the years that because we do not transport juniors and seniors, if that's part of the question, then we do not transport juniors and seniors for the private and parochials.
Okay. I was just asking just more in general of like, for any of the schools, and other schools we transport for, could we just say, have your kid to Creekside by such and such time, and we'll take them to Baden, or we'll take them to St. Gabriel, or wherever?
Another layer to that I'd like to highlight is their start and end times are not the same. So that's an example of Sacred Heart, which we treat with their numbers. It's pretty much another school for us. They go for 30 minutes longer?
Yes, their day is 30 minutes longer.
So that becomes complicated for us because we can stick them on one route in the morning because we can make it, but because they're not out yet, we can't use the same exact pattern. So we have to shift that around. And actually, Jeanette, on our list of get-tos, Jeanette's going to look into that. If Sacred Heart was to have a certain start and end time, would that help us provide better service is one of the topics we'd like to engage with them this winter. But we do not have all that data to yet to start engaging.
Okay, so now I have another question. So they finish later, so we run a special bus just for Sacred Heart at PM?
The Sacred Heart does have dedicated buses for their school. And
From us?
Yes.
Okay.
And in the morning, it's pretty comparable to our second tier freshman high.
Right.
But in the afternoon, because they're a half hour later, effectively, the buses that go to Sacred Heart cannot perform second or third tier. So those buses can do one less trip a day.
Okay, and when you say buses, that's Fairfield City School
Fairfield City
buses?
I believe we have 10
Okay,
going to Sacred Heart that then are unavailable for 2 tiers.
okay. All right, thank you so much.
Just to clarify, so you said 10 buses are unavailable, 10 buses are unavailable for FCSD routes for 2 tiers?
Right.
Okay.
Because of Sacred Heart's
Okay.
time being in between.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Anything else?
Great job, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.